Kami Rita Sherpa has summited Mount Everest 31 times, more than any human in history, and he has decided his son will not follow him onto the mountain. He is not the only one. Senior Sherpas across the Khumbu Valley are quietly refusing to recruit the next generation, because the work that defined their lives is not what they want for their children. On April 10th, 2026, a Sherpa named Aung Sarki reached a section of fixed route through the Khumbu Icefall and stopped. A 30-meter block of ice hung above the ladders, and the crevasse beneath it was melting. So the route refined through 3 decades of working knowledge had become a choice between bad and worse. The Icefall Doctors searched for an alternative, but they could not find one. The serac never fell. Therefore, the route opened directly beneath it on April 28th. A profession built on inherited wisdom was facing terrain that wisdom could not solve. Meanwhile, the mountain kept moving. The institution did not collapse from poor management. It collapsed because the mountain it was built on no longer exists in the same form. To understand how working knowledge built over 4 decades ran out of answers, we have to look at the men still expected to provide them. Subscribe for more forensic breakdowns from the most dangerous mountains in the world. Every spring, before any foreign climber takes a single step on Everest, 8 to 11 Sherpa mountaineers walk into the most dangerous half-mile in the world. They are the Icefall Doctors. They are employed by the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee, an NGO founded in 1991 by the Khumbu Valley's Sherpa community at the instruction of the abbot of Tengboche Monastery. Their work covers the section from base camp at 5,300 meters up to Camp 2 at 6,400 meters, the lower stretch of the climb that every other climber depends on, but that no one else is willing to fix. The Khumbu Icefall is a flowing river of glacial ice descending from the western Khumbu at approximately 1 meter per day. That steady motion fractures the surface into jagged blocks and opens crevasses that did not exist a week earlier. So there is no stable route through the Icefall. There is only the current route, the one the Icefall Doctors re-anchor and refix throughout the entire 3-month climbing season, day after day, until the season ends and the work begins again the following spring. The profession got its name in the mid-1990s from 2 New Zealand guides, Rob Hall and Gary Ball, who founded one of the first commercial Everest companies. They watched the Sherpas use ice screws and hammers to assemble a passage through the broken terrain, and they thought the precision of the work resembled surgery. The name stuck. The naming is worth pausing on. The men who climb Everest for money, guides, clients, photographers, journalists, are visible. The men who make the climbing possible are not. The Icefall Doctors had been doing the work for years before 2 foreign guides gave them a name that stuck. The institution that employs them was founded by Sherpas, but the title that became internationally recognized came from outside the community. This is the small structural fact that runs through everything else. The work is Sherpa, the recognition is Western, and the gap between the two is where most of this story actually lives. The 2026 team is led by Aung Sarki Sherpa, 53 years old, from Sawangma village in the Khumbu. 18 consecutive springs in the same piece of glacier. The pay is between $2,500 and $3,000 per season. A single foreign climber typically tips a personal Sherpa guide more than that. So, the profession does not run on money. It runs on something the commercial system has never been able to buy. 48 of the 340 people who have died on Everest since 1953 died in the Khumbu Icefall. 14% of all Everest deaths concentrated in a half-mile section of glacier. The great majority were Sherpas working there. The men who fix the route die at a rate the men who use it never approach. The arithmetic is the price of admission to the profession. Working knowledge takes 30 or 40 years to build. It is never written down. It exists only in the mind of the person holding it, and transferred by apprenticeship, shaped by accumulated seasons in the same terrain. The Icefall Doctors were built on it, pattern recognition for ice fractures that announce themselves by sound before they collapse, route-finding judgment that knows which crevasse sections will hold for 3 weeks and which will not survive the week. Anchor placement techniques refined through decades of trial and error in the same glacier. This knowledge does not transfer to other mountains. It dies when the person holding it does. Until 2013, the institutional memory of the Khumbu Icefall lived inside one man. Ong Nima Sherpa worked as an Icefall doctor for 37 seasons, the longest career on record. When he died, the methods he had refined and the visual patterns he could read at a glance went with him. The profession lost its longest reference point, but Ong Noma was not the only witness to the long arc. Ong Kami Sherpa first stepped into the Khumbu Icefall in 1975, and he did not retire until 2019. 44 years. That span covers the entire climate window. The years when the warming accelerated, the years when the glacier's behavior changed measurably. He worked the icefall when it was predictable, and he retired from it when it was not. When a journalist once asked him how he had survived 44 years in the most dangerous job in mountaineering, he laughed and answered with one line. His wife says, "No money, no honey." The line is funny, and it is also the closest thing the profession has to a written code. The work was done because someone had to do it, because the family needed the money, because no one else could. The combination of necessity and humor is what kept the men coming back, year after year, into the same broken ice. So the institution did not need a doctrine. The doctrine was the family. On April 18, 2014, a serac on the west shoulder collapsed and triggered an avalanche that killed 16 Sherpas working to fix ropes for the season. 16 men in a single morning. The deadliest accident in Everest's history at the time. The institutional response was to redesign the route, to move the path away from the most obviously dangerous sections. The implicit assumption was that better route finding could make the icefall safer, that the hazard was an anomaly. Ong Sarki Sherpa was working in the icefall the morning the serac fell. He survived. He came back the next season and the season after that. By 2026, he is the senior credentialed working voice in the profession, the man who should know the icefall better than anyone still living. He is also the man standing at the foot of a 30-meter block of ice in 2026, saying he no longer recognizes the place. This is where the assumption fails. The 2014 redesign worked because the rest of the icefall was still the icefall. The 2026 serac is not an anomaly that better route finding can solve. It is the new terrain itself. There is no path around it because the mountain that produced the path is no longer the mountain producing the conditions. Working knowledge becomes obsolete on a mountain where the only alternative to working knowledge is dying. The men who fix the icefall for a living have been telling international press on the record since 2022 that the conditions have materially changed. This is not speculation. It is testimony from the people best positioned to observe the difference. Kami Rita Sherpa is the most accomplished Everest climber alive. 31 summits. In 2022, he told the French wire service AFP that he was now seeing rock exposed in places where there used to be snow, not just on Everest, but on every mountain he was climbing. The pattern was visible to him from the route, repeatedly, year after year. He used the word worrying. 3 years later, speaking to the New York Times after his 31st summit, he was more direct. In his experience, he said, climbing the mountain had become more difficult over the previous 2 or 3 years. When he was asked whether his son would follow him into the profession, he answered for an entire generation of Khumbu families. He was not asking his son to become a mountain guide. The sons and grandsons of other Sherpa families were not joining either. The risks had grown over time, and the families did not want to bring their children into the career. Gelja Sherpa is a former Icefall doctor who has summited all 14 8,000ers. He worked in the icefall when the conditions were what they used to be, and he eventually left that specific job. In April 2026, standing at base camp, he told CNN something that mattered because of where he was standing and what he had seen. When he was working as an icefall doctor, he said, the conditions in the icefall were fine because there was less warming then. Now, working at the same altitude on the same glacier, he was watching it become more dangerous because of global warming. 3 senior Sherpas, 3 different years, 3 different international outlets. AFP, the New York Times, CNN. The observations are consistent. The speakers are different. The outlets are credentialed. The pattern does not allow for coincidence. Peer-reviewed glaciology backs the testimony. In 2022, scientists from the University of Maine published findings from the highest ice core ever recovered, drilled at the South Col itself. Their conclusion was specific. The South Col Glacier has lost 54 meters of thickness in the last 25 years. Ice that took 2,000 years to accumulate has melted in a single human generation. The thinning began in the 1950s, and it accelerated in the 1990s. That is the exact span when the modern Icefall doctor profession was being built. So the inheritance was already compromised at the moment of transfer. Ong Nima trained on a glacier that was already losing mass. Ang Sarki inherited the knowledge of a mountain that had been receding for 40 years before anyone wrote a paper about it. The Sherpas were not the first to notice. They were the first to say so on the record. The science arrived later to confirm what the men already standing on the ice had been telling anyone who would listen. This is the part of the story that does not get told. The conventional framing has Western science discovering the changing mountain and Sherpa labor, adjusting to the new conditions. The actual sequence ran the other way. The Sherpas saw the rock under the snow, the new patterns of fracture, the seracs forming where seracs had not formed before. They told their wives, and they told the journalists when journalists asked, and they kept doing the work. The peer-reviewed paper followed in 2022. The men who could have authored it without instruments had been delivering their findings for years. On April 10th, Ang Sarki Sherpa reached a section of his working route and found a 30-meter serac hanging directly above the fixed ladders. The ice was fracturing in patterns he recognized but could not predict, and the crevasse beneath it was melting. His assessment to the team was direct. The crevasse below was melting. It had weakened since they reached it. It was close to collapsing. But until it did, no one was going to move. The statement was not tentative. It was the arithmetic of ice physics. The serac was failing. The timeline was unknown. The route was sealed. For the first time on public record, the Khumbu Icefall required technological mediation beyond working knowledge. On April 24th, Nepal's Department of Tourism authorized a formal inspection. Aerial surveys, drone-based three-dimensional mapping, assessment by 24 experienced Sherpas brought together to read a single section of ice. The drones were not supplementing the Icefall doctor's judgment. They were replacing it for a specific question the human eye could not answer. When was the serac going to fall, and where exactly would the debris go? The conclusion was unambiguous. No safe alternative path existed. By April 27th, the base camp manager for the SPCC reported that the gap separating the serac from the main glacier had widened from 3 feet to 8 feet in a single day. The wall had not fallen. It was destabilizing incrementally. That same day, a separate group of climbers, including Mingma G from Imagine Nepal and the Polish mountaineer Bartek Ziemski, reported finding an alternative route through the upper Icefall toward Camp 1. The official Icefall doctors examined this alternative and rejected it. The professional disagreement was never resolved. This was not just a technical dispute. It was a glimpse of the profession's future. The institutional Icefall doctors, working through 40 years of inherited methodology, could not certify the alternative as safe. The freelance climbers, working without that institutional weight, found a route the institution had not. Whoever was right, the moment marked something the profession had not faced before, a public split between the institutional voice and the working climbers. On April 28th, the official decision was made. The route opened and it passed directly under the serac. The SPCC released a statement. No safer option could be found. Mandatory safety protocols were issued. Move quickly through the section. Limit loads carried. One person on each ladder at a time. Harnesses clipped on both sides of the rope. These were not safety measures. They were exposure minimization measures. They acknowledged what the route could not avoid: passage under 30 meters of unstable ice. and tried to compress the time each climber spent underneath it. The mountain had not become safer. The climbers had been required to behave more carefully. The serac has not yet fallen. Whether it remains stable while hundreds of people move beneath it is the question that will define the season. The man leading the 2026 Icefall Doctors is 53 years old. The man who taught his generation worked 37 seasons and died in 2013. The men who would succeed them are not coming. The institution will outlast Aung Sarki Sherpa's career. It will probably outlast the next decade. What it will not outlast is the working memory of what the Khumbu Icefall used to be. When the last man who learned the route in the 1980s retires, the institution will still have a team. It will still issue safety protocols. It will still walk into the Icefall every March. But it will be doing the work without the comparison point, without the inherited knowledge of how the ice used to behave. The new generation will be learning a different mountain, the one that exists now. Not the one Nima knew, not the one Kami started in, not the one Hillary and Tenzing crossed on solid snow 73 years ago. This is what gets lost when an institution survives the disappearance of its subject. The team continues, the profession continues, but the standard against which the work is judged shifts to whatever the new generation finds. The mountain stops being a place that used to be different. It becomes the only place anyone can remember. Somewhere underneath a 30-meter serac that has not yet decided to fall, hundreds of climbers will keep walking through, season after season, until the day it does. By then, the men who could have told them what the Icefall used to be will be retired or gone, and the men still working will only know what it is now. Subscribe and ring the bell for more forensic breakdowns of mountaineering's deadliest misconceptions.